The second leg of the race is notorious for bad weather, and this time was no exception. It took 29 days to sail the 7,100 miles to New Zealand, and in spite of a rugged passage and heavy reaching conditions, Drum finished a credible fourth place. The news story of the leg was the pitched duel between NZI and Privateer, who went the entire distance neck and neck to finish an incredible 7 minutes apart in Auckland. But for us, the important thing was that the repair worked, and at last we were back in the race. Leg 3 is 6,200 miles from Auckland to Punta del Este. It was difficult to leave the warmth and the hospitality of New Zealand. On that first night out at the beginning of Leg 3, there were some glum thoughts about the prospect of another cold bout with the Southern Ocean. It was over 4,000 miles to Cape Horn, and we were sure to encounter some heavy weather on the way. But the crew were fresh and keen to push Drum once again to her limit.
Any doubts that I had about settling down with 18 men had been unnecessary. We were like a sort of family. Sometimes the atmosphere was professional, sometimes it was an atmosphere of comradeship, sometimes it was just plain silly. In a race like this, there's no such thing as a good night's sleep. You're on watch for 4 hours, and you sleep for 4 hours, and then you're on watch again for 4 hours. You get into somebody else's bed, soggy, and you get out damp. And so it goes on and on, around the clock for weeks.
UBS, Drum from UBS, over.
My position this morning is south, 4205 south, 17739 west. I say again, 17739 west. What's yours, over?
Roger, Drum position 4205 and 17739. It's correct, over.
It's very correct, Pierre. Over.
We're kept in touch with race control by the Argus system, which is a satellite system. We have a small little antenna that we carry on the stern of the boat. It's a little plastic dome with an antenna inside. It's totally self-contained, has its own battery. And that sends signals up to a satellite, and the satellite will pinpoint the position of the boat. And then that is telephoned through to the race committee, and that happens twice daily, and that's made public. Anybody from the public can call up to the race committee and find out where we are.
For the first 4 days, the weather had been hot, and the wind was perfect. Then we hit the cold. As we dived south, the air temperature fell to 2 or 3 degrees, and with the wind chill factor, it went below freezing. A lot of the time the wind was forward of the beam, which meant the cold seas coming continuously over the bows. And after 4 hours of facing into that foul coldness, it was a relief to get below for some rest and some warmth. There were wet sailbags constantly being dragged about, and the air was damp and smelly. Movement is difficult because the boat throws you about, and even getting dressed or undressed is a major physical struggle. With the sails being repaired on the sewing machine, the generator roaring, the sound of winches clattering, and the constant pounding of the waves, no consideration was given to those trying to sleep. Wet and cold from being on watch, we would get into bunks that were damp and chilly. It didn't matter. Sleep was the most important thing, and we were so tired, we slept the sleep of the dead. Racing flat out in the Southern Ocean is the ultimate sailing experience. When it blows really hard, the westerly gales build up huge following seas, and often the boat takes off on a surf at well over 20 knots. The best speed we hit officially was 29 knots. I think it was more than that. On the edge of control, we needed 2 men on the helm to keep the boat on track, and there was constant apprehension about whether or not the gear could take it. NZI lost her mast on this leg, and a year's preparation and 15,000 miles of racing went out the window. In our enthusiasm to go faster, we had to remind ourselves about the dangers of falling overboard. A man who goes over the side down here is as good as dead. It is almost impossible to stop the boat before he either drowns or dies from hypothermia. The 3 lives that have been lost in the previous Whitbreads were all lost in this ocean.
If you were observing from a distance this morning, you would have seen absolute catastrophe at about 10 to 4. If you can imagine the boat sailing along downwind and you get turned 90 degrees, all the wind just turns the boat, lays it flat over on its side, and you can do that obviously in both directions. If you do it in the direction of the wind, towards the wind, it's a broach, and if you do the other way, it's a flying jibe, Chinese jibe, what they call. All things, all things can break, and the spinnaker pole usually breaks, and it's quite violent. Usually blow out the spinnaker, blow out the mainsail perhaps, possibly lose the mast. It's something you never want to do.
She lay on her side for 2 minutes while those on watch clung to the vertical deck, and those off watch remembered the fastnet capsize. Drum righted herself, but a sailbag had got entangled around the propeller, and its drag was slowing us down. Mickey, an experienced Swedish Navy diver, went overboard to cut it off, but the freezing water soon left him breathless, and because of a small technical mistake, he ended up being keel-hauled right under the boat. The water knocked his face mask off, and when he finally surfaced the other side of the boat, he didn't have the strength to get back out of the water. Then he lost consciousness. We finally managed to drag him aboard, and were relieved to find him still breathing. So he was given the rest of the day off.
And we lost about 16 miles in the process. Not a very good day. Now we have the storm chute up again and going for it.
A real hazard down here is icebergs. Unlike the Titanic, we had radar, and the big bergs, some of which are miles long and have been floating around in circles here for decades, were easy to spot and avoid. But the most miserable job on the boat was standing up at the bow looking out for the little bergs, growlers, which are the size of a car, and if a boat hits one, you sink instantly.